If you're stuck or you're wanting to learn, you came to the right place. Hello, my name is Rob. If this is your first time watching, I'm a coding instructor for freeCodeCamp, and we're going through some freeCodeCamp type of lessons. And in this one, we're going to be building a job application form, going through that lab, and it has some user stories on there. So you may have got stuck. That's why you're on this video. And I bet you didn't know, as a developer, we can also predict the future, because I bet you're going to like this video. So make sure you smash that like button there for us, and that really helps out the YouTube algorithm. And it's something that you can do for free for us by us giving you this video, giving you some help here. So let's go ahead and get started with it. We're going to go through all of the user stories. So let's get to the screen share. All right, so I always like to give a real quick overview on what we're going to do and how we're going to accomplish it. And this is my first time going through it, so I may run into some errors, I may run into some issues, but a lot of times my students, when I'm doing live education, they like to see that we make mistakes and we get to showcase them, and they don't feel as bad or anything. But this is what we're going to be building, is the job application form. Now, I am personally not sure what this is going to actually look like. Is it going to provide us with any kind of styling or styling guide to go along with this? I don't know. What I'm seeing in some of these labs is it may look nice and pretty here, although it may not be nice and pretty with all these red outlines. That's not what we actually end up with when we're trying to pass these unit tests. I am looking at freeCodeCamp's Facebook occasionally, and it has them doing videos or videos of saying, hey, this is how I styled mine. So I don't know if they want you to go explore different possibilities with the styling, but make sure that you're meeting the needs of the user stories. So with that being said, I am also going to have everything chaptered out down below on what user story am I currently working on, and that might help you in your discovery. I'm not going to test things after I get done with every single user story. I'm typically, what I'll do is I'll complete everything, and then I'll run the test, and then I'll go back. So I'll make sure that I chapter out what did I miss. And so you want to make sure that you watch that part, because again, I'm human and I may not hit every single one of these. I will tell you that as we are going through these, you are perfectly with hitting the test button. Just know that I'm going to be coming back to any tests that do fail. They typically go in order as far as those tests that you see with the user stories. All right. So let's go ahead and dive into user story number one. That's what we're all here for. Now, I'm not going to lie, some of these user stories are quick and easy. The very first one here, user story number one. It says that we should have a div element with a class container. Again, this one is super easy. We're just going to do a div, and I'm always teaching the students that as soon as we do a div, let's go ahead and close it off for good measure. And we want to have a class on here of container. And that is it. You do want to make sure that you spell all of these class names that they give you in here. It is code specific or uppercase, lowercase. So syntax does matter when you're trying these things out. All right, let's move on to our next user story. User story number two, let's go ahead and inside the div element, we should have a form element. Inside of where you see my flashing cursor here, I'm going to go ahead and hit the enter key, and we want to have a form inside here. So again, opening and closing tags on it as well, right? And that's all it would need for the user story number two. User story number three, this one's a pretty simple one here. Go ahead and create an input element and then make the type be text. And then we want to have the ID be name. So pretty simple. We've done this before in other freeCodeCamp modules and labs. And so if you remember the input field, it is a void element, meaning that we don't need to have a closing tag on it, but we do need to have that greater than sign in order to complete the tag, but we don't need to have a closing tag like we have had for the body elements and the div elements and the form elements. It does want us to put in here the type. We want to set that equal to text. And then for the ID on here, we want to set that equal to name. And we see that we have this nice little box up here. I don't know if we need to have placeholder text. Again, I haven't read through this quite yet, but that should complete user story number three. User story number four, it says that we should have another input element, and it's going to be of type email with the ID being email. Let's go ahead and do this as well. And to save time, I'm going to refactor code. That's where you copy code and you go ahead and paste it, but then you tweak it to match your needs. So this needs to be type email. And one of the great things about having the type of email is that when we have a submit button, it's going to check to see if this would be a valid email looking at it from a string point of view, meaning that it's not actually going to check to see if that email exists. There's no emails being sent. It's just looking for things like, is there an @ sign? Is there .com, .edu? Is the structure of the email, does it look for this to be a valid email? And then we want the ID to be email, and that should complete user story number 4. We're moving right along. Let's keep it going. User story number 5, it says that we need to have a select element with the ID of position. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to do a select element, give it the ID of position. And again, I'm just doing the open and closing tags. Now, I'm not seeing anywhere, I just did a real quick scrub on here. I don't see anywhere where it is having us add any additional positions on here. So let's take a look at what they gave us in the example, and maybe we can mirror or mimic it. So we can see here that in the positions, it gave us developer, designer, and then manager. So let's go ahead and add those. For the first one, let's go ahead and make the select position be the first option, just like what they had. So for this, we need to put options in here. And for the option 1, I'm going to give it a value of nothing. And then I'm going to go ahead and close this off here. And then this can be almost like our one that we can copy and then refactor. So we're going to do select a position, and we can see that it shows up right here. Let's go ahead and add the other 3 options that we would need to have on here. And for this, I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to paste it a couple times. Now that I have it pasted a couple times, the first one is going to be developer, and then we're going to change this here to developer as well. So this is what gets hidden behind the scenes. This is what people will actually see. All right, let's go ahead and change the other 2. We got designer and manager. All right, looks like we have them all. And again, this is the front facing part here, is the one that goes in between the tags. And this is what behind the scenes would give us data back to be put into our database. So that means our select option is now good. Let's go ahead and move on to the next. User story number 6, it says that we should have a field set element with the class of radio group. Let's go ahead and do that. So inside the form, we're still inside there, we're going to do the field set. This is going to kind of group things together here for us for our radio buttons. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close that off. And then it says that we need to make sure that we give it the class name of radio group. So let me do that. Perfect. All right. I believe that satisfies user story number 6. Let's move on to the next one. User story number 7, it says the radio group class that we just got done doing, it should have a set of input elements and make the type be radio. We need to make sure that they have relevant labels for selecting the available options. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to first, let's do a little bit of best practice cleanup from what we learned with W3 schools. Is let's give this a legend here. So we'll do legend, and then we want to do opening and closing tags on it. Now inside the legend tag, we're going to go ahead and type out availability, because that gives that user the idea of what needs to be questioned here, right? Like, why are we filling this part out? So availability, and we can go ahead and put a semicolon there. Next, it says that it would like to have the input fields, and then we also need to have matching labels. So this part might be a little confusing, and maybe while you're watching this video, this will definitely help you out. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do the following. We're going to do input, and then we're going to match it up with a label. And something that's very important that the instruction gave you with this is that everything here needs to be grouped with that keyword availability. So we're going to do input field. Again, I'm going to go ahead and put that closing tag on here, and then I'm going to start adding in all the attributes that I need. First, I need to make sure that this is the type of radio. And then next, I'm going to give it a name. And so we're going to give it the name of availability. We are going to give this a value, and I'm just going to do like full-time, and then I'm also going to do part-time. So we're going to give this a value of full-time. And next on here, it says that we should have a label for this. And let's go ahead and do that. We'll do a label. And this does get opening and closing tags. So inside the label, we can put in here full-time, and we should now see that appear. But there are some attributes that we need to add to this, which are the 4. And we want to set that equal to, and then we want to match this up with the ID rather. So let's go ahead and add the ID. and this is going to be full-time, and we put this on here for full-time. So that way they match. I believe I have the ability to name them whatever I want. Perfect. So now that we have a working example of a radio button, let's go ahead and copy these two things and refactor them for the part-time. So now that I have it pasted, let's go ahead and change the things. The name needs to stay the same. The ID and the value are the things that can change. So let's change this to part-time, and let's change this value to part-time as well. And then we'll change the label, and then we'll change the for. All right, so now that we have those matching, we can go ahead and check this out. If I click on the part-time label, that's how we know that they are matched, they're married. And if I select the full-time over here, what I expect is the full-time will get solid, and then the part-time will go away. All right. Next is we can choose and specify here. I'm going to go ahead and click the part-time here. We want one selected by default. Again, I don't know if it says that on here, but again, just good practice. And I'm going to go ahead and default this one. So I'm going to do checked on here, and I'm going to set that equal to quotes here. All right, so we want to make sure that one is set to default for it to be true. So we're just going to add one thing on here. We'll do checked, and now the full-time bullet or the checkbox is going to be, or the radio button rather, is checked. So that means by default, it will automatically populate up there, but it still allows you to choose. I think we have successfully completed step number 7. User story number 8, it says that you should have a text area element with the ID of message for entering a message. All right, let's go ahead and knock that part out. So we're still inside the form. We're after the field set, and it wants to have a text area. So we're going to do text area. Now, this is a unique one that needs both and closing ones. And it says on here that the class needs to be a message. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now, I will say that this form is looking very plain and boring. And maybe at the end of this video, we're going to go ahead and style it up to make it look a little better. All right, let's go ahead and keep moving on to our next part here for our next step. Step number 9, or user story number 9 in here, says that we need to have a button element with the type of submit. And so for that, we're just going to go right below our text area, and I'm going to go ahead and type in the button, and this gets opening and closing tags. What goes in between here, we're just going to do submit application. As far as the user story goes, it says it just needs to be of type submit. So anytime it's wrapped in a form and we have that submit type on here, it's going to follow any kind of rules that this form might have, whether that be items that might be required, and so on. It looks like everything else, we're moving on to styling here. And so what I'm going to do next in this next little chapter is let's get this thing looking good style-wise. And then, of course, if you want to fast forward to the next user stories, you definitely can. All right, but this should give us green check marks all across the board for anything up to our point here of user story number 9. So I'm titling this part here HTML cleanup, where we're going to add some IDs. We're going to add some classes. We're going to add some labels and things, because it just looks too bare bone for me to want to continue with this as far as moving on to the next user story. Again, you can do whatever you wish. Feel free to follow along with me here. The very first thing that I would like to do is on the form, let's go ahead and give it an ID here of job and then hyphen application. So that way we can target it later in the CSS. It'd be nice to have. So we'll do job application. Next, I would like to actually have labels on here for each one of these input fields. So I'm going to do a label here. Again, it's going to be for, and then we're going to give it the name. And again, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to match up the for with the ID, and that's how we group things together whenever we're talking about labels. I'm going to go ahead and close off the label so I don't forget it. And then in between here, I'm going to go ahead and put name, full name, to be exact. So now we see the full name on here. I will put a colon on there to give it a little nicer feel here. And what I will do next is I would like to add a placeholder on the input field. So that way we can give the user some feedback on what actually needs to go in here. So we'll do placeholder, and we're going to set that to enter your name. And so you can see that it did in fact go right here. So that way I can still type in something, but then it goes away. So it gives it a nice little placeholder effect. We're going to do the same thing for the email. We're going to set that to enter your email. I will also get a label for the email so that way we can see it also. And I'm going to go ahead and do email. Another attribute that I would like to add to this is let's go ahead and make each one of these required. So I'm just going to do required on both of these. And so that way when we do hit the submit button, if these are incomplete, if they're not filled in, then we are going to get some in-browser error messaging. So I think that's all I want to do for the input fields up above. Let's go ahead and move on to another section to make sure that it looks decent also. So the next part that I would like to add something to is let's go ahead and add a label for our position. And we're just going to call this one position. So we'll do label, and in between the tags here, I want to put in here position. This is going to be for, and again, we're matching up that ID that we did on line 16. So if you would have called this pool party, you'd have to call this one for pool party. So those have to match for the grouping of the label to function here. So great, we got that done. Let's go ahead and move on to something else to fix. Let's make this drop down required also. So I'm just going to use that keyword attribute required on there. And I believe that is all that I would like to do for this group section right here. The next thing that I would like to do is come down here where our text area is, and let's go ahead and add a label for it. So we're going to do a label, and I'm going to go ahead and close off the label here. This is where I want to put in here, why do you want this job? So let's do, and then we want to add that keyword for the attribute, and we want to set that to the message. That means that this needs to have an ID also of message. And seeing if there's anything else that we might need on here. The text area, let's go ahead and give it a couple more rows, and we're going to set that to 5 to give it a little more space. And then of course we can add a placeholder on here, and let's set that to write your motivation. And we'll make this part required also. All right. I think that sets us up for success for styling these things. So let's go ahead and move on to the styling aspect. So there is a special note on here for CSS. Before we start working on any of our CSS work, we need to link the page. And the way to do that is inside of the head section here, we're just going to go ahead and link the page like. So we have this little link tag. Again, it's a void element. It doesn't require anything extra to be put on there, but we do need the relationship be set to style sheet and then the href. This is important. It needs to match the name of our CSS file that they end up giving us with freeCodeCamp. So that's what we need to do in order to match it, because that note down here says make sure that you link your style sheet. Otherwise, anything that we put in here will not work. So the first thing that I would like to do is let's go ahead and target the body of this. And I'm going to simply focus on CSS for right now. And inside the body, I'm going to do font family, and I'm going to go ahead and change this to Arial. And then we want sans. Once we have that, we should see our text kind of change on us, which is perfect. Next, we want to have our background color. Let's go ahead and update that. And I'm changing this to slate gray. Again, I'm just trying to style this to make it look somewhat similar to what because right now it looks really ugly the way that this is working. And then I'm not seeing any user stories that say, hey, let's go ahead and style it a certain way. Next, I'm going to do padding. I'm going to set that to 20 pixels. Let's see what we can do next. Let's go ahead and target the container. So if we're targeting the container, that is a class that we created, and classes always have periods. So we're going to do container, and let's change this so that we can have a max width on here. And we're going to set our max width to 600 pixels. And what that will do is it will make sure that it will not grow any larger than 600 pixels. And to maybe visually see this, we can add our background color and we can set this to white. There we go. We can see that it will shrink just fine, but it won't go any more than 600 pixels. Next, let's go ahead and center this guy. We'll use margins on the top and bottom. We'll set that to 0. And then the left and right, we're going to do auto, and that should center this thing. All right, perfect. It is now centered. We can test this out, and it should be centered on our page. Perfect. Next, let's just add a few more light touches to this. We're going to add some padding, and then we're also going to add a border radius and maybe a box shadow. Let's go ahead and do that next. Padding is going to be 20 pixels. Next is going to be the border radius. We're going to set that to 8. And then let's go ahead and give a box shadow, and let's give it a nice little box shadow cast on here by utilizing these values here. So here we go. Giving it a nice little soft gray as far as the color. And we're going to do 0 for the X. Y is going to be 4 pixels. And then the spread, we're going to give 8 pixels for that box shadow. All right. Next, let's go ahead and fix the labels. So let's go ahead and go to it. With the label selected here, we're going to make sure that our labels are going to be display block. And what that's going to do is no longer are they going to be appearing in line. They're going to take up the full space when we do this. So display block, and you can see that each one of the labels is utilizing the full amount of space that the parent is giving it. Next on here, we're going to put a margin bottom to just shove those input fields below just a little to make it eye pleasing. We're going to go and do margin bottom, and we're going to set that to 5 pixels. And then next, we're going to do the font weight, and we're going to change it to be bold. So let's do that. All right, things are starting to look a little better on here. Let's go ahead and move on to the input fields, select fields, and the text areas to make sure that they can take up their full space as well. All right, so when we're trying to target multiple areas on here, we can comma separate them. And so I'm going to go ahead and do the input field. I'm also going to do the select, and then I'm also going to do the text area. So I'm going to select all of these, and I'm going to apply the same CSS settings to them. The first thing that I want to do is I want the width of this to be 100%. So I want to utilize the full width of our given space. Next, I'm going to add some padding on here, and I'm going to set that to 10 pixels. You can see how it's looking so far. Next, let's add some margin to the bottom. So we'll do margin bottom, and we're going to set that to 15. All right, so I know that these things are over here escaping out on the right-hand side, and we're going to fix that here in a couple of CSS steps here. But the next thing that I would like to add here is the border on this. And so we're going to set that to 1 pixel. We're going to do a solid on here, and then we're going to utilize the hashtag here, CCC. So give it a nice little slate gray here. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a border radius on these to make it look a little softer. And we're going to set that to 4 pixels. Once we've done that, now we can go ahead and add our box sizing. And this is what's going to fix our input fields that we see here escaping. So for this, we're going to do border box. And that kind of shoved everything in there and contained our out of control input fields. Let's see what we can do next. The next item on here that looks like it could use some help is our radio group that we have. And the check boxes here, or the radio buttons itself, are like off centered here. And what we really need to do for this one specifically is let's go ahead and mash these all together by utilizing a display flex to combine these. And then we're going to align these items to the center. So for that, we're going to do the radio group. Let's go ahead and set the display to be flex. And then that kind of pushed everything together, right? And let's go ahead and align items and make that center. So that way you can see that the dot here for the radio button is now like center aligned on here. And then we're going to do a margin top. Let's set that to 15 pixels. And then to fix the crazy wonkiness that we have going on with these spaces, then we are going to go ahead and come down here and target the radio buttons themselves. And so we can say, for example, hey, just inside of the radio group, let's go ahead and target the input. And we want to set that target to the type equaling radio. And let's go ahead and set the width to maybe 30 pixels. Let's see what that does for us. All right, perfect. That kind of collapsed that for us and made our radio buttons look good. The last thing that I feel like I want to go ahead and target is the button. So let's go ahead and do that. Do the button. And here we're going to do width. We're going to set that to be 100% to give it the full width of the parent. Notice that it did in fact grow here. So I'm going to go ahead and move my photo here. And the next thing that we want to do with the button is let's go ahead and give it some padding. I'll give it 10 pixels. Let's change the background color. Let's go ahead and set that to green. Let's change that text color to white. There we go. Let's get rid of that border. We'll set that to none. Let's give it a softer look here with the border radius of 4 pixels. And then let's change the font size for it to be 16 pixels. And then when we hover over the button, let's go ahead and change our cursor to a pointer. We're going to change that to pointer. And so now when we hover over it, we now get a button. All right, let's see if there's anything else that might look a little bit wonky here. I don't like the label part here for why you want this job. Let's go ahead and see on the index. HTML, what does that look like down here so we can target it? So maybe we just give it a top margin here of maybe 5 pixels to make that look a little bit better. So we'll do a margin top and a margin bottom on here for that label. And that should help us visually. It makes it look a lot nicer. And I think that's all I really want to finish up with the CSS as far as the styling and the overall look of this form. And then we can get into these user stories of 10 through 16. So we are on user story number 10. It says that we want to add the focus pseudo class to the input and the text area. And a real quick way for us to do this is we want to basically combine some selectors, just like we did before, and it's just going to be separated by a comment. So it says that it wants the input fields, right? So we're going to do input, and we want this one to only work on the focus. And then I'm going to put a comma on here because we also need the text area as well. All right. So text area, focus also. Then we can do our curly brackets. Now, the thing that we need to do to this, and again, I don't know why it's asking us to do the border outline on a focus here. It's actually the outline on here. And just to show you something here real quick, we'll do outline. We'll just do 2 pixels. And just to demonstrate to you so we can see it here that it is changing, we'll do 2 pixels solid pink and that it adds that nice little border on it. Now, here's what they want us to do is do a border. And notice that it is getting blocked out by the natural blue outline. And so in order to complete the check marks on this user story here, we need to go ahead and do an outline and we need to set that to none. And then we can actually see that little border. And so for this, I'm going to maybe change this to a midnight blue and have it go with it. So there is the color. It didn't specify what color they want us to use. We can really use anything, but that's how we're going to handle user story number 10. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Okay, so user story number 11 is unique. It says that we need to go ahead and set the input, select, and text area elements with the pseudo class invalid and make sure that the border color is set to red when the invalid input is detected. And one of the things that I have an issue with this is it's going to make all of these invalid right off the bat. So we're all going to see red. And typically you'd want this to be shown maybe when you hit the submit button and you're forgetting something, right? So that's one of the things that CSS can't do alone, and you need to know some JavaScript in order to get it to work. But we're still going to put it in here because it's asking for it. And so here's the pattern that we need to do. We want the input. We want the pseudo class of invalid. Then we're going to put a comma. And then we're going to move on to the next element, select. We want to use the pseudo class again for invalid. And then we're just following that pattern here of text area and then invalid. And we're going to put the curly brackets on there. And then inside here, it just says it wants the border color to be red, border color red. And there you go. See, like I'm telling you, that it shows up red on every single thing right from the get-go. And from a user experience that is just not good, right? Like we would expect this after we hit the submit button and maybe something that is required on there. And so you would handle that with JavaScript. But anyways, that should be good enough for user story number 11. User story number 12, really similar to the last one that we just got done doing. It says the input select and then the text area. All three of those in the valid pseudo class, we want to make sure that the border color is green. And so again, I'm going to recopy and then refactor. So copying this, refactor. So no longer am I caring about the invalid. I want to get rid of that and I want to put the valid. So I do valid here. I'm going to go ahead and double click that, copy it and put it on all of these. And then I want to change this one to green because that is what they are looking for. Good deal. And I believe that is good enough for user story number 12. And of course, we can test this out by typing something in here for the full name. You can see it now reads green. All right, on to the next one. So user story number 13, it says the button element should have a hover pseudo class on it, and it needs to change the background color. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do button. We want to use the pseudo class of hover, and in between the curly brackets, we just needed to change the background color. And let's go ahead and change that to gray. So now when we hover over the button, we notice that we get that color change effect. All right. And that should satisfy user story number 13. Okay, so user story number 14, it does take a little bit of multi-step on this one for us to actually see what we need to have happen on here. Was doing a little bit of playing around with this off camera just to make sure that we can actually see it, because it's one thing to just type it out and you're like, great, it doesn't work or I can't see it. And let's go ahead and do the work for number 14, but let's do some extra work so that way we can actually see it being implemented. And so with the checked pseudo class on the radio group, this is what it's wanting us to do. So we want to go ahead and target the class of radio. We're going to hit the space button, or we can just copy this that it has up here, and then we're going to do the curly brackets. The thing that we want to note on here is that the colon checked is right here. And then what it's asking us to do, it says, go ahead and add a border color. So let's do the following. We'll do green for the border color. So we'll do border color, and we're going to set that to green. Next on here, it says also add the background color. So we're going to do background color. And we're going to set that to the exact same thing that we did for the border color. Next on there, it says add a box shadow when the radio button is selected. And for this, what we're going to do is we're going to do the box shadow here, and we'll do box shadow. We'll do an inset, and we're going to go ahead and do 0, 0, 0, and then we're going to do the 4 pixels. And it looks very ugly right here. You can see that little crummy little box is following it left and right. And so what we need to do is we need to come up with our very own custom look and feel for a radio button. And how we're going to do this is we're going to come back up here to our radio group input type. And let's go ahead and add a few things on here. And you're going to see how we are like Lego building these things, or it's almost like you're on Roblox and you're building yourself a character, like, hey, give me some hair that's blonde or what have you. And so we're just adding some properties on here that are going to help us. Now, the very first thing that we need to do on here is let's go ahead and we need a fresh canvas in order to do any kind of custom work with a radio group. But so we're going to do appearance none, and that is going to basically push the reset button on this, and it's going to allow us full customization. So let me go ahead and do that. So there we go. We have the none. Let's do the width, and then let's go ahead and do a border radius, because right now it's a square. Let's go ahead and do a border radius of 50% and see what that does. So in my mind, that should create a circle. Awesome. And let's go ahead and remove the outline. We're going to set that to none. And let's go ahead and add a border on this. And we're going to set that to 2 pixels solid green. And that kind of gives us a little bit of a button-like effect here. And I don't know if, let's go ahead and try this also. Let's go ahead and scroll down. Let's go ahead and give this a color here and change that to white. And there we go. And that kind of makes that inset circle, that ring, make that pop for us and look like a radio button. And I believe by making all of those changes will not only satisfy that user story, but it also makes our buttons or our radio toggle here look a little nicer for the form. So again, all that stuff wasn't necessary if you're just looking to check the box to get done with this. But in order to visually see it, that's what needed to happen. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our next user story. So this one is a unique one, again, that you might need some assistance on, because it is a little bit tricky with this, because how do we tell which label was selected? And CSS has something here called the adjacent sibling combinator, and we can target the radio button that was selected. And then we're going to say, hey, if it's selected, let's go ahead and change the color of the text of that label that it belongs to, that it's grouped to, change that to a certain color as well. And so we're going to change it to the color of green in this example. And what are we talking about here? And let's go to the index.html so I can explain this here. So we have the radio button. Notice that we have the ID. Notice that we have the ID here of full time. We also have a label here that is grouped. It's connected because of the for. That's very important for this to visually work, is we need to say, hey, if this thing is check marked, or if they selected it, we want that neighboring sibling, which is that label, to have that text color of green. So now we can go back to the style.css and we can take a look at this. We can come all the way down here to the bottom. And what we want to do is, again, we're targeting the input type radio. So we're going to do the radio group. We want the input, we want the type, we want that equal to radio. And then we want this part here where it's checked. Now, here is what we need to add for the neighboring or the adjacent sibling combinator. And so we're going to hit the plus sign and then type the word of label on here. And then we can add our curly brackets. Then on here, we can go ahead and target the color green. And now we see on our form, it now follows our selection. All right. So that's what we're talking about with it. And that should satisfy the user story number 15. All right, last user story here. Let's see if we can get this to work here. It says add a first to type pseudoclass to the input element and style the first input field differently. And again, I don't know some use cases of this. I haven't really seen it in action. And really what it's going to be doing, it's going to be scanning the page for any input type. And if it's the first of its kind, it's going to work on it. And on here, it says it wants us to do rounded corners. I'm going to see if we can give it a property that we can actually see and see if you can tell the difference. Let's go ahead and try this. So we're going to do the input. We're going to do first of type, and then we're going to set those curly brackets on here. So here is the thing that I'm going to add on here. I'm going to do the height, and I'm going to do 200 pixels here. And so you can see that the very first input field of type text is really huge. And then it goes normal for the other two. Then we come down here, because this is a select, it's not an input. That's why that one's not crazy big. And then we come down here for the check boxes, the radio boxes, because this is input type radio. It's the first of its type, right? And that's why this little check mark here is so freaking big. That is why these are getting enlarged. And obviously we don't want to do that. And again, I don't know any potential use case for having first of type. Maybe W3 Schools has some examples, but it does want us to do something like the rounded corners, right? And so we can do something like, we'll do border, top, left, and then we'll do radius. And we're going to set that to 4 pixels. And we'll do the same thing to the other one here. We'll do border, top, right, radius, and we'll set that to 4 pixels also. All right. Again, just a few things to put on there. Next, we're going to go ahead and run this code and test it out, see if it passes all these tests. Hopefully we see confetti. Fingers crossed. Let's go ahead and knock that part out here. All right, here we go. Running the test here. And there we go. We got confetti. We were able to complete all this and we didn't get any errors. As you can see, it is good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and submit this and we'll take a look at. Right, so hopefully you enjoyed this video. We got it all done within one go, which is really great. It did take a little bit of time to go ahead and style it, but I think it turned out. Please share this video if you're working with somebody else that might help them understand this, and like the video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the next video. Take care.